Every day is a school day. Now the reason for that title is that I certainly have learnt something during my sabbatical, shall I say, away from snooker. And I've had a chat with a very good friend of mine, Chris Cheshire, who runs snookerspecs.com. Now I've touched on aspects of this video before. If you remember, I spoke about the need for me to have a rather large snooker lens as opposed to some other players who had a smaller lens. Now the reason for that was basically because of my neck position. Now I'm going to just exaggerate two positions for you, so hopefully I can get you to understand what I'm talking about. If I exaggerate the first position, number one, where my nose is virtually on the cue, I'm looking up in that position. My eyes have to be lifted in their socket to the extreme height. Now that can, and sometimes does, distort the vision. And in my case, it certainly was doing that. As opposed to that, if somebody's in the position where his head is looking up there, and he's sort of full on in the face, then obviously he doesn't have to lift his eyes in the socket quite so high. Now the reason that my head tended to be in that position is possibly because I'm getting to be rather old, but also I'm arthritic. So I've got an arthritic neck which is spreading down my spine. So it was very uncomfortable for me to lift my head up. In some aspects it was almost impossible. So what I did, I devised a program whereby I could increase the flexibility, particularly of my upper spine in the thoracic region. So that allowed me to lift my head higher. The result of that meant that my eyes did not have to be lifted quite so high in their socket. Now added to that, and this is the bit where Chris educated me on it, the fact that I was lifting my eyes in the socket could create some distortion. But what was happening in my case, and let's assume I'm trying to pop that red into the centre pocket, when I was getting down and looking left, I'd sometimes see two balls and indeed sometimes two pockets. Not ideal for a snooker player, obviously. So after a long conversation with Chris decided to put a prism in my lens, which has helped tremendously. Now I'm not going to suggest it was easy, it wasn't, all right? First and foremost, I had to do the exercises to increase the flexibility in my upper spine. Not only difficult, but painful as well due to the arthritis, something I needed to do. Secondly, getting the exact prism correct was also a little bit of trial and error. But because of Chris's knowledge, we eventually worked it out. So if you have a similar problem as I do, I've got the onset of macular degeneration. Nothing we can do about that, as I've mentioned, but, you know, Chris will help in any way that he can. So if you have the problems, look him up on his website, snookerspecs.com.